you again for turning to this program. Today, I want to share my thoughts after reading Donald talk by President of Bishop Kosei-kai in the December issue of Kosei. All right, let's get started. In the Lotus Sutra, especially in the chapter 10 about the teachers of the Dharma, there is a parable about digging on a high plateau. This parable describes a thirsty person who digs into the ground searching for water and eventually finds a spring. It illustrates how a person's understanding of the Lotus Sutra gradually deepens over time. Initially, the soil on the high plateau is parched. However, as the person continues to dig deeper and deeper, the soil gradually becomes moist, then turns into mud, and finally clear and pure water is revealed. This illustrates the journey of gaining insight, moving from dryness and ignorance to the refreshing clarity of proper understanding. Using this parable as a preface, the Buddha illustrates how one's comprehension of the Lotus Sutra gradually deepens, as shown in the following passage. If some have not yet heard, understood, or practiced this Lotus Sutra, know that they are still far from the supreme and perfect enlightenment. But if others can hear and understand, reflect on, and practice it, know that they are definitely moving closer to perfect enlightenment. Okay, let's examine how the founder interprets this passage in his new interpretation. Those who have not yet heard the Lotus Sutra, who do not yet understand it, or who have not yet been able to study and practice it repeatedly, should recognize that they are still far from the Buddha's enlightenment. On the other hand, those who have been able to hear, understand, reflect upon, and continually study and practice the Lotus Sutra should know that they are indeed approaching the state of the Buddha's awakening. This passage clearly shows that the steps for deepening one's learning and cultivation are listening and understanding, contemplation, and practice. Additionally, regarding this learning and cultivation, the Lotus Sutra in chapter 2, Skillful Means, states, those who have not engaged in such hearing will not be able to fully comprehend the truth. This highlights how important learning and cultivation really are. Here's why I choose to bring up this parable. I want to reflect deeply on the importance of practice and study. This month's issue, we have received monthly Dharma talks about from our president for many years. One of the key features of Kosei-kai is to focus on how Buddhism, especially the Lotus Sutra, can be applied in our modern daily lives. Looking back at the history of our organization, we see that the founder wrote interpreted words on the Lotus Sutra, such as Buddhism for Today and the 10-volume new interpretation of the threefold Lotus Sutra. Through these works, we have been able to deepen our understanding in line with the founder's interpretations. Then, on January 1st, 1958, the founder clarified in the Declaration of the Manifestation of the Truth that the Gohonzon of Bishop Kosei-kai is the eternal and the perfectly enlightened great benefactor, the Shakyamuni Bodhisattva, making this a milestone, the movement to teach and spread the teaching at the organizational level began. Reflecting the phrase, knowing the way and practicing the way, the founder instructed all members in a Kosei newspaper, saying, we must thoroughly understand the fundamental doctrines of the Buddhism and not forget the dissemination correct faith in the way that suit the modern age. The current president, who inherited Dharma light, has continued this policy. As can also be seen from the mudras of the Gohonzon enshrined in the Great Sacred Hall, the Vajra mudra, the left hand, represents aspiration, while the Abra mudra, right hand, conveys inner serenity. In other words, when the founder had this Gohonzon statue created, he can interpret that imbued the prayer that all people in the world might receive the salvation of aspiration and inner serenity. Furthermore, within the statue is enshrined the Lotus Sutra, transcribed in dedicated by the founder himself, in which it is clearly stated that the surest path to nirvana lies in the deepening one's learning and cultivation while maintaining purity in body, speech, and mind. Through the eras of the founder, the second founder, the current president, and now the third leader, president designate, Kosho-sama, the Dharma light has been faithfully transmitted, and the unchanging truth has considered a complaining authority across generations. To manifest salvation daily, one must engage in persistent learning and cultivation, repeatedly practicing without haste and interpretation, the so-called unceasing and diligence in the simple Dharma talk. With wisdom for applying the teaching in everyday life, sprinkled throughout, it is illustrated through this insight of Confucianism, sometimes through the harmony created by the symphony orchestra. Regarding the words of theological physicists in counterphysical manifest, such as "thank you," "thanks to you," "we are mutually connected," and "I'm sorry." Yet these can be understood as an expression of the fundamental wisdom, the three jewel seal, reframed in contemporary terms. It can be received as a supreme wisdom that we human, living amid a constant changing and interconnection, should always keep in mind and make habitual practice in our lives. He also provided a correct perspective on the foolish aspect of humanity that have been manifested in wars and conflicts throughout human history, addressing the question of what constitutes true patriotism. He taught that precisely because we care for our own country, there is no contradiction in cultivating respect for other nations. This teaching resonates closely with the words of Zen Master Dogen, particularly his teaching on self and others, and the movement from others to the greater self. The concept of the great self and the non-duality of self and others. Finally, the teaching on humanitarianism and rely on self, rely on the Dharma are also introduced. I'm convinced that for the Buddhist wisdom of salvation revealed in these teachings to bear fruit tangibly, one must put even one aspect into practice after learning it. There is the same principle that practice mentioned at the beginning. By the way, do you all still remember the words spoken by Director Kumano during New Year's first teaching session on January the 7th? They were striking and essential, so I would like to share a portion of the Director's address, again below. I interpret that Buddhism path taught by the founder as being surprisingly simple. Buddhism is not meant solely for scholars, for researchers. Rather, it was revealed by Shakyamuni Buddha also so that ordinary people could easily practice it in their daily lives, discovering the truths of the world and presenting them in a clear and accessible way. I believe that the Buddha's wish is for everyone to experience that through the learning and cultivation of Buddhism in their daily lives. Each day can be filled with true peace of mind and inner fulfillment. Once Buddhism is studied, it should not be applied only in times of difficulty or crisis. Rather, it is Shakyamuni Buddha's wish to be practiced continuously in ordinary life, integrated into everyday routines as a living guiding principle. For example, from a disciple's perspective, perhaps a bit presumptuously, I believe that the founder was a genius at bringing joy to the people right in front of him. As a result, everyone he encountered naturally grew to deeply admire and love him. I think it was really quite simple, surely, because he integrated this approach into his daily life as a natural habit of learning and cultivation. He was able to make his virtues so profound and enduring, to learn and immediately put it into practice, to hear and immediately act upon it. If one studies but does not apply it and simply set it aside, I personally find that I quickly forget it. That indeed is a great loss. These were the words we received at the beginning of the year. Along the same line, I heard the phrase everyday use of the Lotus Sutra many times throughout the past year. It would be a waste for the teaching of the Lotus Sutra to remain merely knowledge confined to the text. We should take them personally, applying them in our own lives so that we can gain wisdom from failure and humility from successes. The attitude repeatedly emphasized by the President, diligence, until death, and when reborn, diligence again, is, I am convinced, what guides us toward a state of hope and great peace of mind. With a renewed vow to further deepen our learning and cultivation, I conclude my reflection for this month. Well, I thank you very much for your listening. Thank you very much.